how to convert a knitting pattern from in the round to flat knitting. Do you want to knit a pattern, but the instructions are only available for knitting in the round? But you don't like to, or you don't know how to work with double-pointed knitting needles or circular needles? Well, then you can simply convert the pattern yourself to flat knitting with straight needles, and later on you seam everything with the super simple and invisible mattress stitch, and this video is all about it. It will take a little bit of extra time, but I'm right here to guide you through the process step by step and show you all the little details you need to pay attention to. So let's dive right into it. Part 1. Let's start with the basics and show you how to convert stitches. When you are knitting flat, you are constantly switching between the right side, so the pretty side, and the wrong side, the often less attractive side. When you are knitting in the round, on the other hand, you typically only ever work the right side. Now it's important to realize that a purl stitch is the mirror image of a knit stitch. A knit stitch will create this little V at its base, while a purl stitch will have this little bump at its base. But turn any purl stitch around and it will look exactly like a knit stitch. And that's precisely the reason why when you're knitting stockinette stitch in the round, like for these little socks I'm currently knitting, you only have to knit across all rows, while when you want to knit stockinette stitch flat, you have to switch between knit and purl rows to achieve a surface on the right side that only shows knit stitches, so many little V's. That is what stockinette stitch is. Why is this important? When you have a pattern in the round you want to convert, this basically means you have to convert every second row and mirror it. So my stockinette stitch pattern in the round looks like this. Round 1, knit across, round 2, knit across, round 3, knit across, and so on. And whenever I want to convert that to flat knitting, I have to pick every second row and turn it into a wrong side row. And this means I have to mirror all stitches. So round 2 and round 4 turn into a wrong side row, and mirroring means any knit stitch turns into a purl stitch. So I would end up with row 2, wrong side row, purl across, and round 4 is also a wrong side row, and I also purl across. Now this first example was simple, but often patterns are sadly a little bit more complicated than that. So let's add a little bit of a lace pattern here. Round 1, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 7, yarn over, knit 2 together, knit 2. And so on. Again, you have to turn every second row, or round in this case, into a wrong side row. So round 2 and round 4. So grab a little piece of paper or do this on your computer or mobile phone, and then you will probably need a little table with the corresponding stitches for the wrong side. And it's very important to understand that not just purl and knit stitches are counterparts, but all other knitting stitches have their counterparts for the wrong side as well. So for example, a knit through the back loop turns into a purl through the back loop, a knit 2 together into a purl 2 together, SSK into SSP, slip slip purl. Only the yarn overs stay the same because that's no stitch yet and only an unknitted strand of yarn. So in this case, as I said, round 2 turns into a wrong side row, and you would have to translate it. Knit 3 turns into purl 3, knit 2 together into purl 2 together, yarn over stays the same, knit 5 into purl 5, yarn over stays the same, and knit 2 together into purl 2 together, finishing with purl 3. And for round 4 you would do the exact same, and you would have to go through all the lines or every second line of your pattern and convert it in this manner. I have a very extensive knitting glossary that is available on my Patreon account, and I included a conversion table like this here with all standard and not so standard stitches for you. So maybe that's a good moment to become a patron, support my work, and get access to super smart resources like this and advanced knitting tips you don't see anywhere else. I'll put a link in the description below. Now here's one important note. Most modern patterns typically only place increases, decreases and so on every 2 rows, and very rarely in every row. So the aforementioned lace pattern typically often looks more like this. Round 1 knit 2 together and so on, and round 2 knit across. So the conversion for the wrong side row is typically a lot easier. You can often simply turn this knit rounds into purl row. So row 2 would probably just be purl across. And the same with round 4, which would turn into row 4 purl across. But please pay attention, if your pattern looks like this, it starts with a knit round, and then there is the second round is the more complicated round with a lot of stitches. Well, you can also start your flat knitting on the wrong side. So you start row 1 on the wrong side and you convert round 1 into row 1, purl across, and round 2 stays the same. That makes the conversion a lot easier. And I mean, this consideration goes both ways. So maybe you don't like purling, then I would definitely pick the wrong side in a way so you end up with the least amount of purl stitches. Part 2. Adjusting the knitting order. So we covered the basics, but there is a little bit more you need to be aware of. A lot of advanced knitting patterns are not symmetrical. So if we go back to the little lace pattern from before, it would probably look like this with a left leaning decrease here on this side. So knit 2, SSK, yarn over, knit 7, yarn over, knit 2 together, knit 2. And if you were to transcribe it the way I showed you before, then things wouldn't work out, because you are meant to knit and knit 2 together here at the end of the row. But if you turn your work around and knit the wrong side, the end is suddenly at the start. So as a result, you don't only have to mirror the stitches, but you also have to mirror the overall knitting order. So in this case, the counterpart of an SSK for the wrong side is SSP, slip, slip, purl. And then the pattern would look like this. So row 2 would be, so you start from the other end and you would go purl 3, then knit 2 together turns into a purl 2 together, yarn over, knit purl 5, sorry, yarn over, SSK turns into SSP and purl 3, and the same for round 4. So you have to start transcribing at the other end. I know this sounds a bit confusing, but what you could do is you could just read every wrong side row from the other side. So you transcribe everything the way I showed you before, purl 5, SSP, yarn over, purl 1 and so on. And then you remember to read every second row from right to left. You could, use a little marker to make sure that you don't accidentally forget it. On a side note, that is precisely what every knitting chart does. It only shows you the picture from the right side, and you as a knitter have to translate everything using the key or legend yourself. So a stockinette stitch chart actually just looks like this. One blank chart, this means knit stitches all over, and that's what stockinette stitch is. While garter stitch will look like this with purl stitches in every second row. And And you have to translate this as a knitter. So if your pattern includes a chart, you actually don't have to do anything at all. And if you don't know how to read charts or you don't like it, I urgently recommend watching my video on how to read charts. It will make the process so much easier. I will link it to you up in here. The only thing you may have to pay attention to is if there are brackets or parentheses like this. So knit 4, knit 2 together 4 times knit 4. So you would translate this starting from this end here as well. So this would turn into purl 4. But of course the 4 times applies to the full bracket, and you would have to end this at the end of the bracket as well. So in this case this would end up looking like this, but I guess that is quite easy and just common sense. Part 3, seaming. Once you transcribe your instructions, I need to address the perhaps most important and tricky part when it comes to converting a pattern from in the round to flat, the seam. So obviously you want to end up with a tubular shape despite using straight needles, and this means you will have to seam things using the mattress stitch. I'll add my tutorial to the description below in case you don't know how to do that yet. What is important here is that this seam will use up some stitches. So typically you may want to add a two-stitch stockinette stitch selvage on either side of the repeat you can use for seaming later on. So the above lace example would probably look best if you did it like this. So knit 2 and then the actual repeat, knit 2 together, yarn over, ending with knit 2, and on the wrong side purl 2, purl 3 SSP, and the end another purl 2. So every right side row gets knit 2 at the beginning and the end, and every wrong side purl 2 at the beginning and the end of the row. And then when it comes to the actual seaming, you go through this stitch here on this side and through this stitch here on this side, and so on, and in that manner you can close this seam, and that's why I said 2 stitches. Also be aware that there's also a mattress stitch for garter stitch. I'll link you my tutorial up in here. So instead of stockinette stitch, you could also add a 1 or 2 stitch garter stitch selvage on either side. For some patterns this can look a lot better. Brioche stitches come to mind, and of course a garter stitch. Now you might wonder how many stitches to add, 1 or 2. Well, I would say it depends a bit on the pattern. If it's stockinette stitch along the border anyway, then 1 will probably suffice. That's the stitch that gets eaten by the seaming. So for my lace example, I probably would have used only 1 stitch. But if it's a more complex pattern or a very small diameter project, then I would say add 2, because at least then you will end up with 1 continuous line of stockinette stitch that will look a little bit more seamless in the end, noticeable, but you know, like a feature. Still, this brings me to the second very important part in this section. In a way, converting a pattern from in the round to straight needles is a bit like cutting it open. You are sort of vivisecting the tubular object. And just like a good surgeon, you might want to place the cut in a place where it is least visible. Now the good news is that when you're knitting in the round, like for these socks that I'm currently working on, you are actually knitting in an upward spiral. And this will always create a little jog at the beginning of the round. There are ways to avoid that, and I have a full video dedicated to that here on my channel. But as you can see, you cannot eliminate it totally. It's always a tiny little bit visible. And that's why any good pattern knit in the round will typically place the start of the round in a place where the jog is least noticeable. So for these socks, probably on the inside of the calf. But this also means if you transcribe the pattern as it is, your seam will be in the very same least noticeable spot. Also, a lot of projects don't have any motifs meant to be worn in a specific spot, like cowls or hats like this one. And often you can adjust the position of the seam as you put it on to wear without anyone the wiser as well. Just move it to the back. Still, make a conscious effort to check if that is really the case and make the cut accordingly by, for example, placing the first or the last 4 stitches of every row at the beginning. So I could do it like this. So I take 4 or 5 stitches and I make the cut like this. So in this case we would do it like this. And then I would turn around round 2 into. I start here, yarn over, purl 5, yarn over, SSP, and then purl 3, and then I go back here to the end, purl 3, purl 2 together. Part 4. Gauge. Now in the next part of this video I quickly want to talk about gauge and what you need to consider. And I feel this is a topic that often gets overlooked when people talk about converting a pattern in the round to flat knitting. Most people will have a different knit and purl gauge. It's very common. As a result, your flat swatch, even though you knitted the exact same number of rows and stitches, might be bigger. Typically, it's only the row gauge that is affected, so your swatch ends up higher. And bearing a fundamental change to your knitting style, you often may not be able to adjust your gauge. And in this case, it might mean that you will have to knit a couple of rows less. Say you are knitting a big sweater or so, then that 0.5 millimeter per row can quickly turn into 5 centimeters across the whole sweater. So as a first step, I will always try to get gauge, but when that is not possible and the pattern allows it, I would definitely factor that in. In a similar way, this seam here, let's turn this inside out a bit. This seam here is less stretchy than the rest of your fabric. And for some patterns where you work with a lot of negative ease, that might mean you have to add not just 1, but maybe 2, 3, or 4 stitches on either side of the repeat. Part 5, knitting stitch patterns. I need to address one last thing, knitting stitch patterns. There are tons of books out there with fabulous designs, and you will even find some of them on my blog as well. And whenever you want to convert these knitting stitch patterns to flat knitting, you can follow the exact same steps with one exception. When you're knitting in the round, a repeat is typically written in a way so you don't end up with a jog or a visible transition. So a simple rib stitch in the round would be like this. Cast on multiples of 4 and then knit 2, purl 2 across all stitches in rounds. But when you want to knit that flat, you often have to add a selvage to make it look nice for a scarf or a dishcloth. So for flat knitting, I would actually knit ribbing like this. So I would say right side slip 1, so I'm adding a selvage, and then knit 2, purl 2, and then I would add 1 rib here on the other side. So I would do knit 2 and then my selvage stitch knit 1, and on the wrong side the exact same, slip 1, purl 2, then my repeat, knit 2, purl 2, and then purl 1. So I added a slip stitch selvage on either side for neither edges, and then I added another knit column at the end so you get symmetrical borders. Now, I sadly cannot give you a general rule of thumb what you need to do here. It will depend a lot on the knitting stitch pattern and your personal preferences as well. Of course, you would do nothing wrong when knitting ribbing like this. Right side knit 2, purl 2, wrong side knit 2, purl 2 when you cast on multiples of 4. But I feel this version here looks neater. That being said, a good knitting stitch catalog will account for that. Sadly, very few do and give you bogus literal transcriptions. So before you start a project like this, definitely knit a swatch and see how you like things, and then, maybe add half a repeat or whatever and see where it gets you. As with almost all of my videos, I want to share a couple of words of wisdom here at the very end. First of all, you absolutely don't need to be ashamed that you cannot knit in the round yet. For most of us, knitting is a journey that spans decades, often a full lifetime. And it is totally okay that you still have some exciting learning opportunities ahead of you. That being said, I do urge you to make a conscious effort to learn knitting in the round. Maybe not after your first month, but after a year, why not? Often it is that very first project that makes people shy away from it. And it's true. Those very first steps on double-pointed knitting needles or using the magic loop technique and circular needles are often a nightmare that make you want to throw your whole knitting across the whole room. But don't let that discourage you. I promise you that second project will feel less wild, and by the third or fourth project you will feel very comfortable with your double-pointed knitting needles. But it will take a while to learn, and you need to push through that. For example, you could start with something like a cowl where you simply knit in one continuous round on circular needles. Quite honestly, that's probably even easier than flat knitting because you never need to turn your work around and you don't have to change needles and you just continue knitting on and on and on. And then later on, progress to more difficult projects. Start small, so maybe not a full sweater or finger gloves with 2mm needles. A simple hat with DK or worsted weight yarn is probably a very good place to start. Now I want to stress that it is utterly okay that you may prefer one method over the other. Some love knitting in the round, others prefer flat knitting and straight needles, and that is okay. I mean, it's your hobby, not mine. Still, most good designers will pick one way of knitting a pattern for a reason. A seam, for example, might not always be visible on the right side, but it might leave behind a little ridge on the inside that may be distracting when you wear your socks knit flat. In a sweater, on the other hand, you probably wouldn't even notice the difference. In fact, that seam could even lend some stability to your project. Knitting Fair Isle flat, on the other hand, is certainly doable, but it is so much easier to follow a color chart when doing it in the round. While Intarsia in the round could be your worst nightmare. A lot of toy patterns are knit flat because there are so few stitches on the needle that a lot of people find it way too fiddly to knit those 8 or 10 stitches in the round and rather prefer seaming them later on. So there is typically a reason behind that decision that makes it easier or neater for advanced knitters, and I wouldn't ignore that lightly, especially as mistakes can and do happen when transcribing a pattern, and also you only learn and get better by taking one little step each day. Anyway, I hope I was able to show you how to convert a pattern in the round to flat knitting. Please like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your feedback and your questions, and of course don't forget to subscribe in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.